to Season 3 of the International Classroom podcast. I'm Alex Gray, and this season we're diving into the trends, technologies, and teaching strategies that are reshaping the world of education. From groundbreaking research to insights from top educators, we've got a lot to explore. So whether you're an educator, student or parent, or a lifelong learner, get ready to join us on a journey into the future of learning. And today's episode of the International Classroom is brought to you by Smart Technologies, transforming classrooms with cutting-edge interactive solutions that inspire collaboration and creativity. Smart tools are designed to make teaching more engaging and effective, whether you're in the classroom or teaching remotely. Visit Smart Technologies today to discover how they can help you elevate learning experiences for every student. Now on to the episode. As we prepare for the new school year, we've connected with learning educators from around the globe to bring you their back-to-school advice. Whether it's leveraging the latest tech tools or fostering an inclusive classroom environment, or simply staying resilient in the face of challenges, these international leaders offer insights that can help educators and students alike start the year strong. Let's hear from these global voices on what it takes to succeed in today's ever-evolving educational landscape.
Yeah, so I was there myself in January, and before that, a year and a half there. So I feel like I have some experience in being new to leadership roles. But the first thing I would say is stay quiet. So don't always insert yourself, reference your old school and your old ways of working. Feel confident to say, I'm just listening right now. My first thought might be to, and then kind of fill in the blanks. But be willing to stay quiet, say, yes, I will think about that. I'll follow up on that. Let's meet tomorrow when I've had time to think. Because in the past, I've been too quick to say, I have a solution. I've done this before, but obviously every context is different. And sometimes you look really intelligent when you sit quietly and ponder and don't speak. I've had people say that in the first weeks is, I never knew what you were thinking when you were so quiet in those first meetings. And I said, well, that was deliberate. So that would be the kind of first thing I would say is stay quiet. Sometimes that helps. And another thing I was thinking about and preparing for it is to follow your hunches. So there's this idea that once you start meeting people, once you start visiting a few classrooms, meeting a few students, you will start to develop some hunches, some things you think, I wonder if this is happening everywhere, or I wonder if this really is a problem. And then that'll allow you to be those fresh eyes and illuminate things for, the head teacher who's maybe brought you in, yourself going into a head of sixth form. You're going to be able to follow a lot of hunches of, I wonder if we started in this way or followed this line of organizing things. And then that's going to illuminate things. It might, after a couple of weeks, think, no, that hunch, I can forget about it. That isn't the way things operate, or that's not an issue. It's that idea of, I wonder if, and that could lead to, a lot of new pathways, new directions.
Yeah, I think that's, I'm definitely going to take on board that advice, especially the sitting and listening. I, again, have been in situations previously where I would come in and it's like, oh yeah, I've got a solution for that. We used to do it this way. And I think the general advice giving is, you're in a new school, in a new context. Actually, what works in one school may not necessarily work in that one. So really sound piece of advice for those people going into new leadership roles from an international perspective. Now, as you mentioned, you alluded to the fact that you've recently started, a newish leadership role. And obviously you're starting back in school now. You're going to have new teachers starting with you and maybe that are new into the country for the first time. What would be the things that you are going to be saying to them when you stand up and speak to them and address them?
A big thing, we've kind of talked about that today. We had some leaders in the building, and we want to encourage them to ask questions in that first week. Don't pretend you know or you understand. Education world loves acronyms. We love short terms for things. So don't just nod your head saying, oh, I understand that. Tell us right away. Be courageous, be a risk taker if you're thinking the IB learner profile, and let us know, sorry, can you just, what does that mean? What is this? Where is that? So ask questions. There's no stupid questions. Don't pretend you know or understand things, because once the students are in the building, it's going to move quick, And And also what we want to tell staff is we were talking about the first day, we've got new students coming in on a certain day. Then we have the rest of the students phasing in that second week. Second full week is spend those first days on that social, emotional routines. Don't jump straight into teaching. Students don't need to start tackling algebra the first lesson they're in math. Get to know them, because a big thing we want, I think every school wants, is that personalization, that adaptive teaching. And to be able to do that, you need to know your students. So if you are new to a school, new to the Dubai, but even you're just going to have new classes, even if you've been at a school for 10 years. So we want to encourage them, get to know the kids, sacrifice a week of taught time, because in the end, you're going to know your students better. They're going to have the relationships, and that's going to help you out. And we've done a lot of work with aligning teachers with mentors. So we want every new teacher to have a mentor, not a coach, not someone who's going to observe lessons and, go through things with them, but just a mentor, someone who's been at the school more than a year. Doesn't necessarily need to be someone in your department, but we want to encourage them to have that mentor to go through things like, we have manage back, we have ISAMs. Just sit and go through. This is how you do a register. This is where you would post something in the calendar, whatever it is. And that's a big thing. So it's kind of ask questions, find a mentor, don't rush to teach, take a week to get to know the students.
Well, first of all, welcome. Welcome to the crazy ride of international teaching, international school leadership, whatever your position is. Welcome. This is going to be a wild ride, so buckle up. It is not what you're used to. It's not your run of the mill. So my first advice would be enjoy the ride. Don't come with sort of preconceived notions of what you think it is. Don't worry about what you've seen on the blogs or in the articles or what you've listened to on podcasts. Keep your mind open. Keep your ear to the ground. Learn as much as you can. And the one big advice that I always give new people when you come out here, do your best not to stay isolated. I think one of your superpowers will be connecting with as many people as you can and doing it straight away. In so doing, you make sure that you're forming those networks that are going to keep you going for however long you choose to stay in this region, or if you choose to go to another region. It's going to serve you. International teaching is dynamic, but what's even greater is the community that you build, and that community will propel you. So really the onus is on you to decide how much connecting, how much networking. Don't stay in your school only. Talk to people from other schools. And here's a key piece of advice. Meet people from other professions. Make sure you get out there if you're into sports. Play sports while you're out here. If you're into music or drama or theater, there is something for everybody, and it helps you to meet people from other professions. Go out there and form those networks. They're going to serve you. Teaching in the Middle East or wherever you're based is going to challenge you at some point. So that's another thing I want you to know, is that it's not going to always be smooth sailing, but when you have people that you can call on, it's going to make it that much better for you. So form those networks and connect. That's my thing. And that's my advice to you.
That's amazing. Thank you, Leisa. It's great advice. I'm listening to that and going, I really agree. But where do I go? Where do I start if I want to make connections and build a network, if I'm an international teacher? Have you got anything that you would recommend, whether it's a site or an application or something like that you would recommend to educators to use?
I think, first of all, look out for events. Look out for free events, whether it's a Collab UAE event, or we do some free events at Teach Middle East, or if your school is willing to pay for some paid events, go out and do some events. And then once you start going out, when you meet people, they'll recommend other events to you. I think it's also good to see whether or not you can join some of these groups. They've got Facebook groups, they've got Twitter, some Twitter communities, but I think the best place to start is LinkedIn. I think if you get on LinkedIn, find the educators who who are talking and doing and sharing, and just drop them a message and say, do you know any networking event, or do you know any events, or do you have anything planned? And people are so willing to share, and people are so willing to give any kind of advice or knowledge that they have. But just don't be shy. Reach out, and people will reciprocate, is what I think.
So my golden piece of advice for anybody coming back, I guess, from the summer is to, come back rejuvenated, lots of energy, lots of enthusiasm. I've seen that as a longtime leader now, that if I come back, the last thing I want to do is say, I wish I had a few more holidays. No, I want to come back and say, let's get the school year going. We're all excited. We're ready to go. I find that spills over into the teachers, and then the teachers will do the same thing when they get into the classroom. It's like, okay, it's great to have you guys back. This is a new class, but I'm interested in meeting you all. Let's get started. Let's have some fun. And just right from the tip off, just get that enthusiasm and that excitement going to get the school year headed in the right direction.
It sounds great. If we put it into context, because there's teachers that start that way, and as the year goes on, we all know teaching's a long time, isn't it? It's a long year. What do you do? Yes. What's your advice for teachers throughout the year then, that maybe when the energy starts to drop, when the enthusiasm starts to drop, what would be your advice for them to try and find that, and rekindle that passion and enthusiasm?
Yeah, I think it's good for teachers to look outside the classroom at that point. You can be in that environment can be, it can become sterile. Let's just call it what it is. If you're in the same classroom all the time, look outside the classroom, go on some field trips, plan some things, even if it's just in the local neighborhood, or, even out on the playground, move one of your classes out to the playground for the day. But, just give that different environment to bring a little bit different vibe to your classroom, bring some excitement back to it.
So, this is probably the most disruptive part of anyone's life. They've probably gone home, tasted home food again, spent time with family. And I think it's to be prepared for that excitement, but tinged with that sense of longing as well, because we are away from home. I think it's to be ready for a new year, but then remember that you will feel a little bit of a kind of loss of leaving family behind. But that shouldn't take away from the experience of going back to that new culture, meeting those new people. So I suppose about to kind of summarize, it's going in with an open mind, but just understanding that what we do is a challenge. Moving away from home, working in a completely different country, a different context is a big challenge, is a big job. But go in with that acknowledgement that you're there to do a really good job, and just enjoy it. Just enjoy that time.
Yeah, it's the hardest part, I think, when you move in countries, to be able to, I think, remove yourself from what you had in the past. I think there's a phrase for it in terms of let's celebrate the future, not dwell on the past. And sometimes teachers find that very difficult. I'm in the UK at the moment. And so when it comes to holidays, people are like, what did you do for your holiday? I went, I just went back home. And in some sense, it's like, is that really a holiday? Are you embracing the culture and all those different things? So, obviously you're going to get a plethora of staff who may struggle with that, who may be a little bit homesick or, are missing those home comforts. What's your advice then to staff who kind of after a couple of weeks are feeling that way? What could they be doing to help remedy that?
I think you've got to keep in touch with your network of colleagues. Just to go back to the point you just mentioned as well, it just made me think about one particular transition from one country to another and one school to another. Caught me off guard. I've been somewhere for quite a long time, turned up at this new school, and I found myself saying it all the time, at my old school. And I didn't realize how much I was doing it. And it was brought up in a meeting, say, don't say that again. And I think you've got to let go of the past. That's not to say you haven't learned lessons from it, and you can process that internally. But I think you don't want to be that person that turns up who's always reflecting on their past experiences without looking forward. And that sounds trivial, but I think that's how people would perceive you. If you're that person that's always saying, we did this in my old school, you might come across as someone who's perhaps slightly resistant to change, a little bit stuck in their ways. So maybe some things should be said inside, whereas the language that you use with your new colleagues should be about facing forward and then facing new challenges, adapting to a new workplace, that kind of thing.
As you say, take what worked, but also be flexible and adaptable, because just because it worked in your last school doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work in the one you're moving on to, does it?
Exactly. And I think keep those connections going. So you have your LinkedIn PLC, keep connected to them. Don't assume that you're moving from one context to another and you do have to completely cut away. So I think as well, being away from home, those connections to, I suppose, colleagues from previous schools almost become family-like as well. So keeping hold of those connections. But I'm lucky that I've been in the international sector for about 12 years, I think. And I've got what I would call family in 5 different countries. And they're people that I could pick up the phone to and have a really detailed, a lovely conversation with, despite that gap of time and that the distance between us. And I think being the sort of person that cherishes those connections will serve you well in the future. And I think if you have that kind of mindset, you'll arrive in your new school willing to make friends and make connections that will stay with you as you invariably move on to another stage in life and professional life later on. So I think you get these kind of, perhaps people have a tendency to keep themselves to themselves. I'll be here for 2 years. It's a contract. I move on. But if you don't put yourself both boots in school and the culture, then you're missing a hugely rewarding part of that life that we've kind of taken ourselves upon.
So from you then, moving from the UAE to Uganda, and obviously you've done it quite a few times. What was the biggest thing that you found in terms of moving, like say, from UAE to Africa that you took from that's been your best experience, and that key advice you'd give from having that transition from all these different countries?
Here, I think it was most definitely the environmental shock. So, there are elements of living in Kampala that were taken for granted in somewhere like the UAE. So driving around can be a problem. It's a very congested city. Things can take a long time. And if you're not careful, you come in with that mindset from your previous place and start to get really quite anxious about things not happening in a time frame that you were comfortable with from your last place. So getting around, expecting things done incredibly quickly. But the flip side of that is that this is also a very much more diverse context as well. So from my experience in UAE, fantastic schools, but there were often similarities in the student body or in the faculty. Whereas here, we've got 40 different nationalities across the whole school and umpteen different languages. So for me, that was a big positive, coming somewhere that has that huge diversity. It reminded me of a previous posting where I had, which was equally diverse. But I wouldn't say I had to let go of all those experiences in UAE. It's not massively different, but things like climate, things like getting around. I think the old things that frustrate me the most, and this has happened in every single country, is the administrative side of life. So getting your work pass, getting visas sorted, getting documents stamped. And I found that to be here a little bit difficult to navigate because there are so many different ways of doing it. So I do miss that kind of rules-based approach that places like UAE and Singapore have. Whereas here, you kind of discover things as you discover them, if you like.
Yeah, and as with all international schools, they do get sorted eventually, don't they?
Yeah, you'll get there in the end. I think it's just you'll eventually stumble across that one person that seems to know it all and say, have you done this? And you get that light bulb moment, and then things start moving along again. But that's part and parcel of being away from home, isn't it? We're not in the UK. We're not in our home countries. We can't expect everything to work in exactly the same way.
So I think if I were giving advice to someone who were moving to Singapore, for the very first time, possibly new or first position overseas, my advice really would be, be kind to yourself. I think there's always a sort of period of excitement, once you've sort of signed contract, you're packing up in your current country, and then reality hits when you actually arrive on location in Singapore in our case. There's always going to be a sort of inevitable period of a bit of anxiety, a bit of worry, possibly, a bit of concern about have I made the right decision in those early days. There'll be a lot of unknown. And I'm not just talking about school. I'm talking about, settling into a new culture, making new friends, navigating new relationships. And I think the key thing is to recognize that all of that is really normal. For me, I think it's really important to remember just to take your time, take some deep breaths. This is a period which will pass. And it's really normal to feel a bit of anxiety and worry about whether you've made the right choice. And the key to me is really just be kind to yourself, accept that this is okay. You're not going to be able to do everything all at once. Perhaps you're feeling, that you're not performing at sort of 100%. All of that's really normal and acceptable and to be expected. I think in terms of school, the key is just, use the people around you. They've all been through it. ask questions. Remember that they were once new also, and don't be afraid to ask. No question is stupid. Just kind of remember that you've got a lot of support around you, and don't be afraid to ask for it.
As an educator coming in, I think the number one thing is to get to know other people and build your network. Either being someone new in the country or being someone new in the school, it's really important to focus on the relationships, to have the people who you feel comfortable with, to be able to, have someone to vent to when you need to, have someone to laugh with, but really developing those relationships, because everybody comes with so many different, so much experience that they can bring either to the education, to the school you're in, to the UAE, and there's so much that you can connect with and build those relationships around. I think one of the most important things is that, because I remember when I came 13 years ago, the people who I met in my first year are still my friends and are like my family now. They literally feel like they're my family. They came to my wedding in Jamaica, and I've traveled around the world to meet them, and those relationships are key, especially when you're so far away from home and you're an expat.
Yeah, I completely agree. So for those people, maybe they kind of got that question of, well, how do I go about making these relationships? What are the types of things that I could be and should be doing to try and help build these? Because, Dubai and the UAE as a whole, teaching internationally can be transient. So what advice would you give to them in terms of the ways in which they can go about building these relationships?
So if you're in a school that has put you up in school accommodation, this is a perfect way, because that's like an instant community that you have right there. If you've chosen not to live in the school accommodation, it's about getting out and doing some of the social activities that people do. If the schools have a back to school event, which most schools would do, because that's something that we're really trying to push, making sure that everyone has connections, make sure you're attending them. Even if you've been in Dubai 5 years or 10 years, or you move from another school, you don't know who you're going to meet. Schools are such big places. It's really easy that the primary school team never sees a secondary school team in a whole entire school year. So going to these social events that the school might put on, even if you've been here a long time, is essential, because you don't know who you'll meet and who you'll connect with. I think one thing is Dubai is amazing for so many different aspects of life that you can, get into. If you're into cycling, if you're into swimming, if you're into, my goodness, anything you could think of, ballroom dancing, there is a community out there in Dubai for it. So it's about finding what your interests are and making sure you get out and do it, because just because you're in another country or a city doesn't mean that your interests have to go away. And there's so many people it's such a thriving city. There's so many people you can meet. But it is about putting yourself out there and having those open conversations and, showing vulnerability at times and, being your true self, not trying to, I'm not going to say go to brunches, because I think there's far more to Dubai than going to brunches.
I think firstly, there is some wariness, I think, about China in the West because of everything we read in the media. But China's an incredibly safe place to live. People are incredibly welcoming. And I think this goes for any international context, and perhaps even more so somewhere like China, though, where there are less Western visitors. Just being open to the culture. It's something that I think is really important, something that we'll be thinking about next week during our induction, is how we frame the relationships, not only between all of the new expat staff and obviously the new expat staff, those already here, but also the expat staff with the local staff. And that's something which I think is really important, that I'm really passionate about, and making sure as a staff that we have those relationships across all the staff in the school, because I'm very conscious that often in international schools there's that divide between expat staff and local staff. So I think that's really important. I think it's really important to get to know a bit of the culture. Just it's finding time in your first week, and it's part of our induction program actually, just to get into Shanghai, go for a walk in town. International schools are often on the edge of cities because that's where the land is. But I think it's really good once you're here in that first week to get a sense of the school, but also to get a sense of the city. In terms of the school, I think the key thing about the induction week is just to feel comfortable in your work environment. Get a sense of the key systems in a school. Hopefully meet as many people as possible, begin to develop those key relationships and to begin to get a sense of the culture of the school. You're not going to get or have all of your questions answered in the induction week, and it's not really the aim of the induction week. There's plenty of time for that once all the staff are back in inset, and then of course it's a process beyond that as you get into your role. The students in a couple of weeks arrive and what have you. And that's a long-term process, but the induction week is just hopefully a great chance, to begin to get to know your context and have key questions answered, particularly around where you're living, where the nearest family mart is or whatever.
But then once people settle down, it's then the question really becomes about teaching. And so I'm curious from your side, when teachers are settled in and we're now getting into the idea of the teaching or really what is the nuts and bolts. What advice do you give to these teachers, and whether they're experienced teachers or whether they're newish teachers, but coming into an international setting? Because I think sometimes there's maybe this misconception that, in international school teaching is different.
I think broadly what strong teaching looks like in, the UK state sector is the same as what we believe strong teaching looks like in our context. We recruit quite a lot from the UK. I think partly because we have some really, really strong teachers. I'm applying from back in England, and actually in terms of the nuts and bolts of teaching and learning, and I'm going to talk about this actually at the start of our inset. I'm going to talk about the science of learning. We want people that know their craft, they've refined their craft, and I think that's universal. Having said that, there's this phrase often in international education, the suitcase curriculum. This idea that you bring your curriculum in your suitcase from one context to the other, and nothing changes. And there's no need to differentiate to students. So whilst I do, I think that the basis of pedagogy is largely universal in terms of the actual curriculum that you're teaching. You will need to spend time refining lessons. I no doubt wherever you're starting, there'll be a bank of resources and lessons, what have you, and schemes of work for you to get stuck in. But then with time, refining them, thinking about the context, thinking about the students. I'm a history teacher, so obviously I've done a lot of work over the years to think about how I can adapt history to teaching. I was previously in South Korean students, now in China, so Chinese students, and how can I make it culturally relevant? I think that's really, really important.
So for anyone that say is coming out as well, thinking about things to bring, what would be your top three things that you would be bringing to China with you? Assuming you can get them into the country, by the way.
Okay. You're pretty safe with things going to China. The one thing, by the way, it's, you can get books in China, but it is harder to get the books that I really want in China. So if there's particular textbooks, for example, you really want, as a school, we can order stuff. It takes quite a while to get here. So I think it's worth bringing. There might be one textbook, as a history teacher, that is really useful with a particular year group. So I would encourage you to perhaps think about strategically about what books might fit into your luggage, bearing in mind books are heavy. I think creature comforts. Obviously, when you're moving internationally, all of us, we tend to ship loads of stuff, and it takes, it can take 2 months for the shipping to get here. So think about the things that you would like to have in your apartment to help you get settled in. That could be all sorts of things. It could be a picture. It could be really simple things like, it's in China, you can get pretty much anything online in terms of food, tea, but there might be one very, very specific type of tea. It's very hard to get licorice all sorts in China, actually. That's something I always bring back with me. But ultimately, as an international teacher, you will be moving into a really, really supportive community. And I think that's something that's really important to remember for all of us when we do move schools, and even more so if it's the first international school that you're joining. There'll be people who want to help you. And just from your arrival, I'm going off after this meeting actually to meet a new member of staff at the airport. Being really open, being honest. Maybe after the first week, there's things that really aren't going to plan as you expected. Go and talk to someone about it. Don't keep things to yourself, because those things will be far more magnified if you're in an apartment somewhere in Shanghai, don't know anyone in the city, you're a long way from home. So make those relationships. That for me is the most important thing for new members of staff coming into schools and the purpose of induction week.
Great stuff. And lastly, from this, what are the top 3 things that you do to prepare yourself for a new school year?
What do I do? I think, and I'm doing this week actually. So we've got induction starting next week. I mean, I left. We finished term the penultimate week of June. I uploaded the timetable to ISAMS, our MIS, and I jetted off. So giving yourself a little bit of time, a day or two before the start of the school year. That might be just before inset, to make sure you've got your ducks in a row, and you are really clear on what your priorities are for the given term. So you don't get into that first meeting and someone asks you something and you say, I've got no idea, I hadn't thought about that for 2 months. That's really, really important. I've been doing a lot of this over the summer holiday, actually, and I've got some presentations in induction and inset, and I deliberately don't over-plan those presentations at the end of the school year, because I think summer for me is a really important time to reflect, just to chill out, hopefully have some sort of me time, and think about how the year's gone and actually what your key priorities are for the next year, and that process of reflection and really being focused when you come back and starting as you mean to go on is really important. So you don't get 3 weeks in and you suddenly think, I hadn't thought about that, or I hadn't really given myself the time to think about what that might look like in context. I hadn't really considered my priorities. And the third one, I mean, it's great to see new staff. It's great to see all the staff coming back. I guess just being mentally ready and then being open, being convivial, kind of reinvigorating the friendships. Having not seen everyone for 2 months, it's exciting seeing everyone again. Going to the socials in inset week and making sure that you make the time. Obviously, we're all busy people to socialise, because we are communities of schools, and I think that sense of community is really, really important. And our sense as members of community is really important to everything we do in school.
I think advice going back into school in the next week is just to take a deep breath and dive in. I think one of the things we always struggle with is when we've got new kids and we've got new staff and we've got new things. And I think it's an opportunity just to enjoy it, because everything's new. And everything's new for you. Everything's new for the people around you. And it's like hitting refresh. You're kind of like you're in a video game and you're respawning into your world. And it's just another chance to go at it again. And I think to just really enjoy the first few weeks, because that's when the kids are at they're most interested, they're most excited, when the staff are really kind of trying to see, okay, well, how do I get better at this? How do I do more with this? The weather's usually good. I think the start of term for me is a period of absolute joy. And it's a lot of hard work, especially as a school principal. You're thinking about processes and you're thinking about, have I done everything that we needed to do? Have we got everything in place? Is all the furniture there? But I think as well, it's those little moments that you can have with a new colleague, with a new student, just discovering. And I think that's what education's all about. It's about discovery, no?
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. I think it's an opportunity always, isn't it, in terms of, I like the refresh, because if you didn't like some of the things you did last year, it's nice that you can go, I didn't like that, it didn't work, and I can come in and change this or try something new and have the opportunity to do so. And I mean, speaking of new, let's say I'm now I'm into a new role, and I'm starting a new role in August, but I'm starting a new leadership role. And you've got obviously lots of experience and expertise in this field of being international and leading. What would be your advice for someone who's taking up a new leadership role this year?
New leadership roles are brilliant. And I think the first thing to do is to get to know the people who are in and around you. And that is talking to the teachers who have been there for a while, who have seen other people do that role or have got their own ideas about the environment that you're in. I think it's talking to the kids. I think that's super important. It's something we sometimes miss out on, and we don't talk to the students enough about their views and their ideas and how they see the school and how they see their experiences within it. I think talking to the parents as well, because a school is this collection of relationships. And if we don't tend the garden, I'm getting all Voltaire on you, then what's going to happen is you miss out on certain things. I think as well, when you're going into a new role, go for the cricket metaphor, you have to watch a couple of deliveries just to see what the pitch is like before you start kind of playing the shots. I think we're very keen sometimes to make change immediately. And I think what you have to do is you have to do your research. I'm a big fan of understanding context and understanding the people around you and the content of what you're doing, and then you can start communicating these changes and working out what it is you think is going to be in the best interests of the community, because that, in any leadership role, that's who you're serving, not yourself, not the parents, not the teachers, not the students, but the community as a whole. And thinking about it in those terms, I think you can't go wrong.
It's a great advice. And you mentioned community there, and there's one thing we often look at. I think when I speak to educators, we're often seeing it from one side of the fence, and that is a student side or a teacher side. And we forget sometimes about parents. And there's going to be parents out there listening, and it might be teacher parents. There could just be parents who have moved because they are a traveler, the in-tow spouse, as it were. They kind of travel behind these. And they might be in this country for the new time. It might be that they're letting go their children going to this international school for the first time. We're both parents here, and we've experienced this. What's your advice then for those parents from your perspective as the principal, but also a parent as well, about what would be your advice to them as they come into school for the first time, they're dropping off their kids for the first time? What would you be saying to them?
I talk to everyone. Talk to the teacher, talk to the other parents, get to know them, go for a coffee. Ask to see the head just to say hi, 5, 10, 15 minutes. If you're in a new place, go and talk to everyone. Go and have a conversation with the receptionist. Go and have a conversation with the people who work behind the cafe, if you've got one in the school. I think when you're coming into a new school, you're coming into a new community, and you want to understand how that community works, but also you want to understand what you can do for that community, what that community can do for you. And the only way to do that is by being open to it and just diving in with both feet. And you'll soon find your tribe, especially if you're going to a new country, because that's super important. Is finding, being honest about who you are and saying, look, this is what I'm interested in. This is what I do. These are my kids. This is what they're up to. And then you can start to find the people whose kids love the same thing, or the people who are into the same thing you are. You could be into esoteric, arabesque modern art. You're going to find someone. You could be into learning new languages. You're going to find someone. And you might, especially in the international sector, you're going to find people who've been in the same countries you are. You're going to find people who've maybe even been in the same city. Sometimes you'll bump into people who go, hang on, you worked with, I had a conversation just like this yesterday with a guy in Australia. I was put in touch with one guy, and apparently he'd been talking to another guy I know really well in Hong Kong. And it's very, very small, especially especially when people are traveling all around it. But I think be open and just dive in with both feet and be welcoming and be friendly, because those who are there already are going to be just as nervous about new people as you are about those new people. Everyone's always a little bit terrified.
Well, I think it can be incredibly exciting moving and working in a new country. And it can also be incredibly overwhelming because there's so many different things, because you're setting yourself up to live and work and exist in a different part of the world. And there can be cultural differences and all sorts of differences. And it can seem in the first, few days, especially, and maybe in the first couple of weeks, that there's just so many things to do. And so my advice would be try not to be overwhelmed and try and enjoy that excitement and that freshness of actually moving into a new country and all the new smells and experiences and things that you're seeing. Just try to enjoy that, and everything will happen, but try to enjoy it and let it happen and try not to be overwhelmed.
Fantastic starting point. I think that's it, isn't it? Sometimes it's very easy to get caught up in certain things. And it is important, isn't it? I need my furniture, or I need to make sure I've got the internet, or I need these things. But trust your school, trust the HR, trust your leaders. They will have these things, and their experience, they've been there, done that. But focusing, let's say, on new roles, because you have a wealth of experience when it comes to leadership as well, Kai. If you've got someone who's stepping into a new leadership role, like, for example, I am, What would be your advice to me? How do I go about tackling this and making sure I can be successful?
I think it's really useful to think of the wise words of Stephen Covey. One of his 7 habits is seek first to understand before you seek to be understood yourself. And I think when you go into a new school or into a new role, you will come from at least one previous school and at least one previous role and perhaps many previous schools and previous roles. And you will have views on how things will be done or should be done. But you're going into a new school, and I think you need to take time and maybe take the full sort of yearly cycle to really understand what happens in your school and why it happens, and who your colleagues are and who your students are and who your community is. Because everything works somewhere, but not everything works everywhere. And I think to respect and understand the context before you start saying, and we've all met those teachers, in my school, in my last school, we did this. And so I think respect what your new colleagues are doing. And while at first it might not seem obvious why they are doing things in a certain way, and it might seem a bit unusual or strange to you, they will have very good reasons for doing it that way. So try not to rush in and change too many things too quickly. I mean, there might be some things that you need to get some quick wins, and you might be able to change some things because you want to have an impact. But also, again, be mindful of the context and respectful of what's happened before you, and try to understand that and then slowly build on the good work that's already in your school that you're moving into.
I think that's a great piece of advice for anyone coming into a leadership role, whether it's head of faculty, whether it's head of year or higher up, whatever. I think that's just great advice for anyone coming into education about just survey the land and get a feel for things, isn't it? And I'm just curious then from your side, obviously you say your second day back with obviously your induction program, but I'm curious, what are the top 3 things that you do to prepare for the new school year?
Okay, well, it might sound obvious, but I think the first thing is you need to make sure you've had a good holiday, and that I'm well rested, because I think when I think back to any end of term, I'm always exhausted at the end of term, and I'm really grateful that we have these really decent holidays as educators, and so I think it is really important that during the holiday we try and switch off as much as we possibly can, and that can be difficult for some of us. But so to have had a really good holiday, and then sort of leading into that, making sure that I'm sleeping well, because if I get a good night's sleep, I'm going to have a really good day. If I don't have a good night's sleep, it's not going to be such a good day. And then I think it's a bit like the person starting the new role. The enthusiastic leader starting the new term. I am still, which I'm really grateful for, very excited, enthusiastic about the start of a new school year. But again, we need to take people with us. And so I have to, manage my enthusiasm, manage my energy levels, and pace myself. And I think if I think back when I first started teaching, there was a senior leader who just seemed to be very steady in terms of his energy levels. He was about as energetic at the start of term as he was at the end of term. And after a few years, I was brave enough to ask him, well, what's the secret? He says, it's simple, Kai. You just need to pace yourself. And you're not trying to do everything in the first few weeks or the first month. Just pace yourself and manage your energy really carefully. But to do that, the starting point is you need to be well rested with a holiday and on a day-to-day basis. We all need to make sure, I think it's so important, that we have enough sleep. I'm going to sound like my mother now, but there we are.
There is great evidence out there for it. I think is a guy, I came across Matthew Walker talking about sleep. I think he's the Berkeley professor. And even I previously, it's like new bits of it. But having that, it's like, yeah, I completely agree. And I'm sure everyone is interested in this, but did you have a good holiday, Kai?
I had a fantastic holiday. Yeah, had a few weeks in the UK and a few weeks with my family in Greece. Lots of swimming, lots of exercise, which might not sound like a rest, but for me, being active is quite restful. But yeah, absolutely fantastic holiday, Alex. Thank you. How about yourself?
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you. 5 weeks in the UK between sort of North Birmingham, tiny little village in Staffordshire, and then my wife is Yorkshire. So as my father-in-law likes to say, God's country, and it really was. So wonderful. Nice to be back. Nice to be back in Dubai as well now.
I think at the beginning of the year is a really good chance just to reset a bit. I always like to have some objectives for the year that I sort of work out, in that period before the start of term. Things I want to achieve professionally, that I want to achieve in my classes, or as a school leader. Really important to sort of have an idea of what you want to get out of the year, because otherwise the years just blend into each other and you get stale. So I'm a great fan of, sort of 10 years experience rather than 1 year's experience 10 times over.
So you kind of alluded to one thing. Is there anything else that you personally do or you like to do as you start back in the school year?
Well, I think it's slightly different as a school leader. So, obviously you're then setting out the sort of key messages for the school for the year. And I think there's a sort of cascade goes on. So you sit around with your closest senior management team and you sort of say, well, what are the key messages? So I'm going into a school new for an interim year next year. And the key messages are going to be very simply, we're going to get back to basics. We're going to really get back to the basics of what goes on in the classroom. And I think the thing is, as a school leader, you then have to reiterate that, because I think there's so much busyness around the beginning of term that you just have to stick to a very simple message and keep repeating it, and eventually it will drop. And I think the idea that we all do 3 things better every year is, I think, a really important message. What are those 3 things going to be? Well, they will change individually. Each of us needs to improve in our own areas. So you work on what those are going to be. And I think that's a really important thing. And then the cumulative effect of everybody doing 3 things better is just quite extraordinary on a school. And then year on year, and it's the sort of it's the Sir Dave Brailsford England Team GB cycling model. It's about incremental marginal gains, and I think school improvement's really around that. It's about everybody doing a little bit better in what they do.
Yeah, I like the Dave Brailsford, sort of that 1%, isn't it? I remember that, and obviously we've just had the Olympics and the cycling was back up there, which was great. That even I remember down to the pillows. That, and it was it's quite eye-opening at the time. But from there, obviously, you're someone who's very well travelled when it comes to international teaching as well, and led numerous different fields, different schools around. For people who maybe are coming into international schools, and we've got people arriving today or have been arriving, recently, what would you say to them in terms of how to best maximize and capitalize on this experience if it's their first time teaching in an international school?
Well, I think most people find it unbelievably refreshing. Especially if you're coming out of the UK. So, I think schools are well resourced and people aren't necessarily used to that. Discipline generally is significantly better. The management structures are stronger in that respect, and you've got, on the whole, you've got a fee-paying parent body, all of which means that students are motivated, parents are more on board. So I think if you're coming to it new, particularly if you're coming out of, say, the UK state sector, I think you've got to sort of recalibrate, and it's worth playing a bit of time just getting used to that. But at the same time, I always say to new staff, don't lose being a fresh pair of eyes. Too many sort of school leaders get very frustrated with new staff saying, at my previous school, we used to do this. Well, I'm a great believer that at your previous school, you might have done it better than we do here. And I think that's really important that, the school taps into that. But rather than a sort of ongoing stream of consciousness about what's new, I think probably worth jot it down and then, put it together. And I try to meet with new staff 3 weeks in, just to sort of get their first impressions and to tap into that fresh pair of eyes, because there's obviously an enormous amount that the school can benefit from effectively appointing these really high talented staff and using their expertise.
Yeah, I think that's a great piece. And just lastly, so you're starting a new role. Just curious, what are you looking forward to this year?
I'm really looking forward to working back in the UK. I mean, I'm working in an independent school. There's a lot of challenges around. I'm really looking forward to the sport at the weekends. I've really missed, the whole sort of going out and watching the school team at the weekend type of thing. That's been part of my life for a very long time, and it wasn't part of my life abroad. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think, there's some really, really big challenges with VAT going on to school fees. A 20% fee increase is going to be a bit challenging. And it's about bringing a community together. I've got a new senior management team, a lot of new staff. It's going to be a very exciting time, and we sort of need to reset. And I think it's going to I'm going to have to draw on all my experience over the years. So I'm really looking forward to doing it. It'd be great.
That's amazing. Well, thank you ever so much for joining me and giving your advice on this. And we wish you all the best with the new school and the new school year.
Thanks ever so much. Great to be on.
Thanks again to Smart Technologies for making today's episode possible. Smart is committed to supporting educators with innovative tools that enhance teaching and learning. From interactive displays to collaboration software, Smart Technologies is helping schools around the world bring education to life. Visit their website to learn more and see how you can transform your classroom. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the International Classroom. If you found our discussion valuable, we'd love for you to join our growing community. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn for the latest updates, behind the scenes content, and more. And don't forget, if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us reach more educators and continue bringing you the content you love.